Welcome to Paradigm Shift. Starting now.
Welcome to this explainer. Today we're jumping straight into what is essentially a geopolitical masterclass. We're looking at how international water law is struggling, and honestly, in some ways completely failing, to stop the strategic weaponization of the Indus River basin. We usually think of borders as these rigid lines drawn in the sand, right? But here, the borders are liquid, and the stakes, they literally couldn't be higher.
Section 1, the geography of survival, structural vulnerability in the Indus Basin. Because, well, before we can analyze the law, we've got to look at the map.
Let's start with the foundational reality here. Pakistan relies almost entirely on the Indus River system. And notice the sheer scale of that reliance. A staggering 95% of Pakistan's freshwater is devoured by agriculture. This isn't just about food on the table. This is an industry that directly employs 42% of the entire nation's workforce. It generates a massive chunk of their GDP. But here's the critical vulnerability. The headwaters of this life-giving system, they rise near Mount Kailash in Tibet and flow through the Hindu Kush and Karakoram ranges, meaning they are physically controlled by China, India, and Afghanistan.
To Section 2, the history of water law, specifically looking at the Indus Waters Treaty of 1960. For decades, this geographic vulnerability we just talked about was managed by one of history's most resilient bilateral water accords. Tracing this legal timeline, the 1960 treaty survived an unbelievable amount of tension, multiple diplomatic blowups, 4 short conflicts, and 3 major wars. But fast forward to April 2025, and the landscape changes drastically. Following an incident in Pahagam, India unilaterally declared the treaty to be in abeyance. This triggered a massive legal crisis, which culminated in June 2025 when the Permanent Court of Arbitration at The Hague stepped in, ruling unanimously that the treaty actually remains completely in force.
Section 3. Upstream dams as strategic weapons, infrastructure as leverage. We have to ask ourselves, how does a legal breach or a suspension in a treaty manifest physically in the real world? Well, it manifests through infrastructure. This quote from Prime Minister Modi effectively collapsed all previous diplomatic ambiguity. The sources highlight that the construction of the Kishanganga and Rattle hydroelectric projects on the western rivers traditionally allotted to Pakistan under the treaty, turns physical engineering into explicit geopolitical leverage. See, even without physically rerouting the rivers, an upstream power can control the timing of the releases. By holding back water during the low flow season, say between December and February, and releasing it at variable intervals, an upstream neighbor can cause absolute cascading agricultural disruption downstream. Section 4. China and Himalayan hydropower, the hegemonic shift. Because the geopolitics of water in this region cannot be reduced just to India. We have to look further upstream to the ultimate high ground, the Tibetan Plateau, which is controlled by China. $137 billion. Take a second to let that number sink in. That is the massive investment cost of China's Maidog hydropower station on the Yarlung-Tangpo River. When this thing is completed in 2033, it's not just going to be a large dam. It will be the largest hydropower installation in human history. We're talking 3 times the power of the Three Gorges Dam. China sits at the very top of this hydropolitical hierarchy, controlling the sources of both the Indus and the Brahmaputra. Section 5. The climate threat multiplier, an irreversible catastrophe. Because compounding all of this geopolitical tension, the treaties, the megadams, the diplomacy, is a highly volatile, non-linear wildcard. Severe climate breakdown. Pakistan holds roughly 7,000 glaciers. That is the most of any single country outside the polar regions. These glaciers in the Hindu Kush Himalayan region supply over 75% of the Indus River's flow. And right now, they're melting at record speeds due to rising global temperatures. A phenomenon driven by global emissions that Pakistan, which contributed less than 1% of them, hardly even participated in. Section 6. The future of water security. Strategic responses. The global legal framework, including the UN Watercourses Convention, has proven largely insufficient to address this level of weaponization and climate disruption. So what actionable options does a structurally vulnerable state actually have left on the table? Well, our sources outline a pretty clear syllabus for survival requiring 3 immediate steps. First up, accelerate domestic storage. This means finishing major dams and lining agricultural canals to stop the massive 66% water loss in the current irrigation system. Second, aggressively pursue legal rights. That 2025 Permanent Court of Arbitration victory, that's the model moving forward. A state must document every single treaty violation and sustain international legal pressure. And third, demand climate justice.
Water security has to be globally reframed as a climate issue, forming powerful alliances with other lower riparian states across Asia and Africa to demand accountability and compensation.
As the Indus River transforms from a historic cradle of civilization into a modern battlefield of megadams, suspended treaties, and rapidly melting glaciers, will international law adapt fast enough to prevent a regional catastrophe? Or is the future of South Asia's water already written in the concrete pouring upstream? Thank you for joining me on this explainer.